pleasure today of introducing Carol McCormack to you. Carol comes to us from the United Way, where she is the CEO of United Way for Hampton Roads, and she's not new to the business. She's been in the United Way business for 24 years. She's previously been the CEO of United Way in Mesa, Arizona, and CEO of United Way, Aiken County, Aiken, South Carolina. 24 years of helping people do things for others. Does she sound like a good Rotarian candidate? Yeah. She is a Rotarian. She's on hiatus right now, and she's looking for a club, and she is a Paul Harris Fellow. So by public acclamation, Carol is a native Virginian and a graduate of William & Mary. She and her husband Mark have one child, Catherine. So how about a good Rotarian welcome for Carol McCormack?
Shake.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So, thank you very much.
Sir.
If you don't mind, can you hear me from here?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I would much rather coming up. I have to apologize. We had a PowerPoint presentation, so those of you who really like to just look at pictures and are not as much into listening or reading, I'm sorry. We'll have to deal with it. I have thinking about listening to all these jokes, I do want to share one thing with you before I get started. And it's just a joke that I bring from you from Arizona, because this is where I heard it. There was a politician, and he was traveling around the country on a whistle stop tour. You guys remember what that is, with a train? So he's on a train, and he rides the train into a town, and they stop, and he gets out on the platform, and a crowd comes around, and then the media comes, and he speaks, and then he goes to the next town and does the same thing again and again, and then one day he stops, and he goes out on the platform, and there's no crowd. The media came, still no crowd. But you can't give a speech without a crowd, because they're going to see this, and they're going to say something. So he's really panicking, and he looks over across the railroad tracks, and he sees this huge crowd. So he walks over to the crowd, and he's looking around it, and he sees a police officer. And he goes up to the police officer, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, but I'm a politician. I have all this media over here. I really need a crowd. Could I possibly borrow your crowd for a few minutes while I give a speech?" And the police officer looked at him and kind of scratched his head and said, "I don't rightly think this is my crowd." So the politician said, "Well, then whose crowd do you think it is?" And he said, "Well, I think it's that guy up on the gallows. I think it's his crowd." So that's who they came to see. So the politician said, "Okay, well, can you ask him if I can borrow his crowd?" The police officer looks at him and says, "Okay." So he goes up onto the gallows, and he talks to the guy for a few minutes, and he walks back down, and he comes back to the politician, and the politician is just so anxious, and he said, "What did he say? What did he say?" And the police officer said, "He doesn't mind one bit if you borrow his crowd, but if it's all the same to you, he'd like to be hung first because he's heard you speak before." And I always remember that when I speak to people, right? So without the benefit of the PowerPoint, I'm just going to go right into United Way and what it is we do and why you want it in a community. Just in many ways, it's why you want a Rotary in your community. And if you look at United Ways and Rotaries, we actually parallel each other a great deal. In fact, the United Way that I came from, the founding members, if you went back, and I bet you here would be the same way, if you went back, most of the founding members of that United Way were Rotarians. So there is a very, very tight relationship. Why? Because people who care about their communities care about their communities. Correct. I mean, really, that's what that is. So, in a nutshell, what is United Way? I've been with United Way. It's been over 24 years, but I love the fact that you said 24 years because it makes me feel a little bit younger. So we must have given you 24 years. I keep saying it's the same number, and I was thinking, it's probably been longer. Anyway, I've been with United Way for a long time. And in the essence of what a United Way is it's just simply a way for local people to make decisions about their community, what they want in it, and how they want their community to look. And so as you go across this nation and you see different United Ways, because every United Way is an independent 501c3, I'll say that again, we're independents. We have our own board of directors. We are a membership organization, not a chapter organization. We don't have a headquarters that tells us what to do. We collectively vote on what we want to say you deserve to be a United Way or not. So we do have membership standards, but there are things that are self-imposed, and they are very strict and very long. And they have, every year we go back through those to say, what do we need to add to them? What do we need to say, this is what it means to have the emblem of United Way. And so if you go across this country, you'll see that the agencies that are funded are different. We have some national agencies that many of us fund because they have chapters in your local community. Salvation Army is one of those, right? Great agency, does a lot of really good work. And so you have Salvation Armies here, and we fund them. In Mesa, where I came from, we didn't have a Salvation Army until the board of directors of that United Way, because it was a small community at the time, went out and got a Salvation Army and started a chapter there. So who started that Salvation Army in Mesa, Arizona was actually the United Way. And by extension, the Rotary clubs of that community. Right? So if you think about United Way in that way, that's all we are. So you look at this organization, and last year by audit we were about $20 million. But if you saw how few people work there, you'd be surprised, because that's not a business model that any business has. And why is that? Because we use volunteers. We use lots and lots and lots of volunteers. In fact, you were telling me, Peter, that you were a loan executive. So right. At one point, your company lent you to the United Way so that we could run a community campaign. And so why do we run a community campaign, folks? It's not because people like to give away money. I guarantee you, people don't like to give away money. I do this for a living. They don't. It is not their nature. However, people do it because they want good things to happen, correct? So that's why people donate to United Way. So then who gives away the money? So we go out and we raise dollars. So here's the other side of United Way. Well, one of many sides of United Way, but we have to give away the dollars too. So how does that happen? Well, we have a group of volunteers who make the decision. And I want to stop that and say they're actually donors. Because if your money is in the game, you act differently. If it was money you freely gave and it's in the game, you act differently. And so last year we had a panel of 63 different volunteers from all across Southampton Roads, so all across, who came together and went through first agencies' finances and audits, and then secondly they went through the application that the agency provided, and they looked at the quality of the work they were doing. They actually physically went out and visited the agency. They actually then came back and said, what are the statistics, what are the results of this? And it took them, when we added up what 63 people did, it was 1,200 hours. It is a robust process. And so then based on how much we've raised, they actually score the various things that the agencies are doing. And at the end, we take the chair and vice chair of each one of the panels, we call them panels, the people who go out and they'll have, one panel does all homelessness, and another one may do all early childhood, and another one may do out of school time, like Boys and Girls Clubs and Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, that sort of thing. And so they take all of their numbers, what they have assigned those agencies in terms of what they're asking for money for and what's the results and et cetera, and we put it up on the wall from the highest to the lowest, and then they horse trade. They sit there and they say, okay, with the pot we have, what are we going to do with it? And some years it changes quite a bit. Somebody had mentioned the dwelling place. So we're no longer funding the dwelling place because they had gotten so far down with their finances. Part of that is the city of Norfolk, part of that is the federal government. And so, it's just a great agency. We hope it comes back, but sometimes it doesn't, right? So agencies move in and out of United Way because of that, where you are, where your finances are. But there is a lot of issues with homelessness, and so we do that. So that gives you a sort of a snapshot of raising money and giving away money. But there's another piece to that, and that's the strategy of giving away money. If you have a bunch of people who are gathered around and they're very interested in their community, and they look at what a United Way is capable of. One of the things they ought to be doing is what I call community planning. They ought to look at things and figure out how can we, as a community, make big picture differences. And I'm going to give you an example of where we fund in a very small way and where we fund in something that we believe is really important in this particular community. And I'm not going to use an agency here because I like to always use one that's not in the community, in the city that you're in. And so I'm going to use Chesapeake Mobile Meals. Chesapeake Mobile Meals, very small agency, about a half-time staff person. And previously, we just went through a new strategic plan at United Way, and part of it was taking apart the application process and saying, we need to tailor these applications to what we're trying to achieve versus having everybody fill out the same application. It will make us make better decisions. So the first thing they did is they pulled off what they called urgent and essential needs. They went through all the programs we fund, which is about 107, and came back and said there are 28 that we think we ought to take this application process and make it littler. Now, you never see bureaucracies, right, making anything littler. It's volunteers that do that, right? Because it's their money, it's their community. And so what they did is said, if we're doing a mobile meal, and it's simply taking a hot meal to somebody who's homebound and infirm, if that's all we're doing with that, and we want to do that as a community, we want to see that happen, how would we judge that? And so what they decided is, really what they wanted to know is who you're serving. How do you validate who you're serving? I mean, how do you know that that person doesn't have money and therefore you shouldn't be giving that? What's the quality of the service? So how do we know the meal is nutritious? Well, they pick it up at the hospital, the local hospital. So, and they have a great relationship with them and get very cheap meals that way. And then what is the cost? So tell us what it's costing you to deliver these meals. And are you in line? Is the cost reasonable? And are you in line both locally with other Meals on Wheels? And are you aligned nationally so that we believe those costs are the correct cost? And if you are, as a community, if we want to have that happen, isn't that what we ought to judge you on? So that's what we agreed. Now, when it came to a next level up, we expect to have outcomes, and what we call that is impact. And that may be a homeless agency. So I'm going to give you an example with the 4 kids and what they do. So what they do in that process is they not only bring the family in and the child in, but they give tutoring to the child. They make sure that the parents have child care. They give you job training. They make sure that that happens. They then get you into a next level of housing, which we call transitional, and the ultimate goal is you are off on your own again. Now, that's what we judge by, because we don't want to be 3 hots and a cot. We want people to get back on their feet. And so that's a harder application. By design, it's harder. But also by design, it's going to cost more to do all of that versus taking a mobile meal to someone. So again, these are donors, volunteers who are being very thoughtful. But the third thing we looked at was there are sort of big picture problems in this community that need to be solved in a way that's very different. If you think about the homeless, or you think about someone who receives a mobile meal, it is it's one person, and it's a relatively small group of folks. We were looking at some of the other issues within Southampton Roads that were very much of concern to the board members, to the volunteers, and so they looked at this issue and looked at ways to solve big picture issues, and we've come up with a process called collective impact. And collective impact is not just United Way's money. Collective impact is, how does United Way rally around a variety of different organizations that all have the same aspirational goal? And then instead of having it so disjointed, have them work together towards an ultimate outcome. And so what the board decided is the first thing they wanted to work on was education. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about education and why they picked it out. If you look at, there's an organization, Johns Hopkins, that has done a lot of studies on kids who drop out. And what they found out that, and we all know the American dropout rate is too high, correct? I mean, it's pretty significant. But what they found out is half of all dropouts come from only about 1,400 high schools in the nation. And so if the people who lived in those communities got a handle on what was happening, you could actually flip the dropout rate of the nation. Think about that. And so you wouldn't know that if you don't have the research. And so we looked at it and said, because they actually then broke down that information by United Way and shipped it to their local United Ways. And why did they do that? Because they expect local United Ways to pay attention to this stuff, yes. And so we started looking at it and we realized, we actually had more than one high school that was on their list, but the one that was performing the lowest was Booker T. Washington High School. In fact, it has, at the time, the lowest on-time graduation rate in the state of Virginia. And so we looked at that and said, okay, who's not graduating? Because this is about data analysis, not about judging, not about saying these people aren't doing this or whatever. Who doesn't graduate? And if you look at it, and this is data across the nation, who is not graduating is your very poorest children. And in fact, we can take it down, and it's not just kids living in poverty, it's what we call living in extreme poverty. It's about half the national poverty level. And so what we did is we looked at the kids who should be graduating at Booker T and said, who's not graduating? And started tracking that down. And the first place that we came to that we saw was a huge issue for these kids in terms of where these kids live was Young's Terrace. And so when we looked at Young's Terrace, there is an elementary school in the middle of it. It's P.B. Young Elementary. So let me give you a little bit of statistics. Because these kids walk to school, all the kids in that housing project go to one school, elementary school, and they walk to that school. So because these kids walk to school, we were able to look at the demographics of these children. What we found is the average household income was less than $12,000 a year. 40% of the households work. So these are not non-working people. It's just they make minimum wage. And they often have part-time jobs with minimum wage. So 40% of the households work, but 50% of the households did not have a high school degree. So what's the number one indicator as to whether your mother will ever graduate from high school? You will ever graduate from high school. It's your mother did. Yeah. If your mom didn't graduate from high school, statistically, you're not going to either. There's lots of reasons for that. The biggest is she can't help you. She can't help you if she wasn't successful herself.
And she's not home most of the time anyway.
And so, yes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Oh, okay. That's what I thought you were going to ask me a question. Okay, I got you. Thank you. And so, actually, that's perfect timing. And so, so we looked at that. Statistically, less than $12,000 a year per household. 50% of the adults did not have a high school degree. We had about 450 kids who go to that school. And so what we did is we went into that school and talked to the principal and said, what do you see as the issues? Why do you think the kids aren't doing as well as they should? What can we do as a community to make that difference? And we talked to the principal and we talked to the teachers. I'm going to tell you a real quick sort of sidebar story of some of the things that happened. First of all, we pulled together the city manager of Norfolk, the superintendent of public schools, the CEO of Norfolk Southern, who's a huge United Way supporter and very helpful, the head of Norfolk Housing, because this is where these people live, and they have things that they can bring to the table, the head of EVMS, the medical school, and the Dean of Education from ODU. Now we pulled these folks together and to start talking about what it is we should do in response. Well, the first thing that we did was a very simple thing to build trust in the neighborhood. It turns out that they had been there for 70 years. This elementary school's been there almost 70 years and didn't have a playground. And so there was a swath of land beside it, but no one had ever built the playground. And I didn't realize we had elementary schools that didn't have playgrounds, to tell you the truth, because most of the nice ones do, right? And so my staff member, the manager of the city of Norfolk had said to his staff, if it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral, and United Way asks you to do it, I expect you to do it. Cut through the red tape and do this. And so she took the head of Parks and Recs and the head of maintenance of the schools down to where a playground could be and said, seriously, don't your kids have a playground? Well, it turns out that the schools had had a playground in storage for almost 5 years because they had accidentally bought 2 for Crossroads. And the guy said, but we don't have the money to put this playground up. There's a lot of specificity around putting a playground up. So Parks and Rec said, we'll put it up. They didn't. I offered volunteers. I said, we can get that playground up in a heartbeat because we know people. And the city said, nah, we don't want the liability of your guys doing this. We'll do this. And so it wasn't an additional cost to any of us for these kids to have a playground. So now they have a playground. So we went from that to say, what are the things we could do to affect their ability and their learning? And we've done a lot of different types of interventions, but I'm going to tell you about one specifically, and this is where the PowerPoint would have been good because it would have taken us through it very quickly. So the teachers explained to us that children in poverty, one of the things that they need is just more time on task. They just need more time. It's just the way it is. They don't have as much of a background. And so given that additional time, given that additional opportunity for learning, they actually will do well. And so one of the things we did is we looked at metadata across the United States about children in extreme poverty. And what we found is that children in extreme poverty during the summer regress 2 to 3 months, whereas your kids actually do a little bit better, and this is in reading. And it's about exposure, right? So what we did is we said, we're going to have a summer school. Think about it. You have a school building that's empty, right? You have a principal that's there anyway and willing to oversight a summer school. The city was willing to do security. The city was willing to do provide some mental health counselors because some of these kids really come into some real struggles with this. The EVMS provided a lot of students who are willing to help in a variety of ways in terms of tutoring and et cetera. Several of the universities and ODU had students who were willing to help. And so what we did is we asked the teachers, what do you think would work? And they came up with 4 hours of hands-on, minds-on academics in the morning, which means it's project-based. It's not a teacher lecturing like I am right now. It is you having a project and working on it. But in that project, you're going to have to read and you're doing math. And so they did that in the morning. In the afternoon, we had earned enrichment. So if you didn't come in the morning, if you didn't come on time, if you didn't do your coursework, you didn't get to play flag football with, say, the sheriff's office. Children do what they're incentivized to do. Behavioral issues went down. Yes.
But isn't that what the Dream Academy was doing if they closed?
You know, it's a bit different in the sense that it wasn't a collective impact, because I'm going to tell you how little it cost. In the end, what we figured out was the only thing we needed to pay for was certified teachers. We need certified teachers to teach these kids, to create that piece. We were able to do 8 weeks with 300 kids of a voluntary summer school, and they came. And it only cost us, after we pulled everything together, and everybody pulled together, $136,000.
But you fed these kids too.
Oh, they got fed breakfast, they got fed lunch, they got to do earned enrichment. But that's because people came together and did all that. And on Fridays, they did all kinds of field trips that were all given throughout the community. Think about, you're paying for it already. You pay for the arts. So why shouldn't the arts, if they're going to take care of poor kids, come and take care of it in a way that is collective so that the kids do well? So just real quick, our kids did better both in reading and math and excelled in terms of their numbers. Even as late as this May, so the schools pre-tested them last May. We tested them after summer, fall, and May again. And our kids are outperforming children who did not come to summer school significantly. And so we realized we need to do it again. This year we're in 2 schools, back in PB Young and at Tidewater Park. Eventually, we'll spread that out. So,
Amen.
I know. Oh, okay. Not having a PowerPoint makes it longer, not shorter. That's what I found out.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
that was very enlightening in a lot of ways, and I know Clinice was taking lots of notes, and we all know why. She's running for school board. While you're thinking about which Rotary Club, so you don't forget the 408 test, and you remember where to call.
Okay.
Carol,
And
I was the first one to email you the day after you arrived, inviting you to join this club. So don't forget.
Yes, you did.
and one more thing, we have a drawing, so I need you to pick the winning ticket.
I will close my eyes and pull it. Oh, I don't have glasses. So
Last three, 897. Come on, 897.
I got it.
All right.
Retirees. All right, folks, thank you much.
All right.
Yeah.